Right, welcome everyone. Happy Thursday evening or afternoon. You're back for more. You must really like what we're doing. Got a bunch of people coming in, so we're going to jump right in, and more people will, I'm sure, come and say hello and come and learn with us. But we're on the third time. Hello, everyone, to part 3 of our curriculum review story and what we're doing. I am Andrew Miller, Director of Teaching and Learning at SAS. We got Gynelle here as well, who's a math specialist and coach. And we're just going to jump right in and get into the content today. I'm sure I don't know about y'all, but it's funny. We're lucky enough to have a short work week. We have a public holiday tomorrow, but I was just commenting that I feel like the shorter weeks are even more exhausting sometimes than the full weeks. I don't know why that is. It's some weird thing that happens, but here we go. Let's move through the material. So our outcomes this time are really to talk about, we were talking about data last time and analyzing the data and collecting it and strategies, everything from focus groups to instructional walks and the like. And now we're going to talk about, well, so you have this data. What is the data telling us? And how do you come to consensus on recommendations from the data, as in the kind of the now what of the data? What do we do with all this data, and what do we think we should be doing toward what do we need to be doing in social studies, math, or learning support? And finally, and as well, we're going to be talking about how do you engage the community in that process, all stakeholders, and what do you do to build the buy-in and demonstrate that you're listening and this is what you're going to do and here's how we're going to do it. And then we'll talk about action planning, how you prioritize action planning, and again, other decisions that may come out of the review. So with that, I'm going to turn it right over to Gynelle. She's going to talk about the processes that we use to start to come to consensus and make those recommendations.
Yes, so we had a lot of data. And so the big question is now what? What do you do with that? So if Andrew, you can go to the next slide. So we use this framework. If any of you are familiar with adaptive schools, you've heard the terms dialogue. Well, even if you're not familiar with the terms from adaptive schools, but dialogue and discussion. So dialogue essentially means through words, and that is to create a shared understanding. So we looked at what is all of the data telling us, what does it really mean? And then you move into the discussion. So essentially discussion means to shake apart. And so then we took that, and really it's to reach agreement. So then we could move forward to make a decision. So the core team really served as the primary group in making the recommendations. So we took all of the data back to the core team after we had looked at it, and they made the recommendations. They said, based on every data point, the learning walks, the literature, the student data, the focus groups, all of it, here's what we think. So here's the process, a process that we use that could help you as well. So we had people individually brainstorm recommendations, so there wasn't groupthink. Then they looked at their table, they combined ideas, and then they created a poster that was really the start of our recommendations based on all of our data collection. Then we did a group share out, and then because we know people have different expertise areas or different areas of passion, we decided to go into this birds of a feather team. So they got to pick. So based on the various different recommendations, like there was one around tutoring, around intervention, technology, etc., then they were able to choose. And that's when they really started looking. So after they said, okay, I'm going to look at technology, for example, then that team came together and went through and looked at all of the data and literature and crafted the recommendations. And that was really the foundation.
Yeah, and so like in social studies, when we did it this way, same process, the birds of a feather team, but like those groups looked like a curriculum team. Another group was about Asia and Singapore history. Another group was about teaching. So they got to self-select into areas based on that and comb through the same thing, the data and the literature on all those things.
Yep. Okay, next slide. So I think we talked about this a little bit ago about what requires a team, a collaborative process, what can you do as facilitators? Because we know if we put the entire process on the entire team, it's exhausting. It's a lot of work. So essentially, after we had the recommendations from the core team, we took those and developed those. And then the report was written, and we added all of the literature as evidence for that. And then we had the report. And then Andrew, you can go to the next slide. And then essentially brought it back to the core team. So it was this iterative process of core team, facilitators, core team, faculty, community. And so we kept coming back and forth so that we could make sure that we got the input and the feedback that we needed. So a specific protocol you could use then for the feedback sprints is really looking at, the way we framed it was the schools with strong whatever it is. So we showed you that framing at the beginning. So schools with strong math education, schools with strong social studies education, you can look at that group and say, okay, there's so many things here. How can we combine them? Is there anything missing? And then we looked at, like I said, Andrew and I had already, or the other group had already gone in and put in the evidence, but we said, what else? We really need to make sure that this is evidence-based, and we really need to have multiple set of eyes on it. So they added evidence that we possibly missed, and then really looking at the recommendations, and there was some wordsmithing and really just saying, like, was there anything big? At this point, we weren't changing a lot, but really we wanted to know, was there anything big that we needed to add in?
Yeah, when we just did this for social studies over the last month, we did it asynchronously. I think there's pros and cons to both. When you put people in a room, obviously it requires time and energy and time outside of class and substitutes and all that planning, but they are dedicating their time and you really have great buy-in. On the flip side of that, when you're doing it asynchronously, you're not having any of those costs that you have to think about. But I'll be honest, sometimes people just didn't engage all that much. Like not everyone for the team really felt like they had time to do it. So, I think there's pros and cons to do it synchronously or asynchronously, and you kind of have to make a decision. In retrospect, I think my reflection is we got great feedback, but maybe not from everybody. And so I think bringing everyone in the room, even if it's for like an hour after school, like just to do this, that would be a worthwhile process.
Okay, so then we were at a point where we really were ready to bring this to the faculty and say, what do you think? And so we did it through a variety of venues. Andrew, you can add on to this part as well. Like we did some faculty meetings. We had like our website, which I said not many people looked at, but that was okay. We tried. And so we were communicating through there, through the in the loop that we have. There were different ways that we were collecting feedback from the faculty.
Yeah, some of the ways we did it was, we put the recommendations up on posters and had them talk about what are they thinking, what are they wondering? Maybe it's like a see, think, wonder. I think we've also done it where we had people kind of sticker vote, which we'll talk about in a minute, but their perceptions on what is maybe most important to them or what they would really like to spend their time in. So that feeds into what we'll talk about later, which is kind of prioritization. But I think it is important to bring it back to the faculty before it goes out. And actually from a very important cascading communication thing, which Gynelle has highlighted, as you craft these recommendations, right, this is where the rubber is really meeting the road, so to speak. And it's like, this is real. So it's important that you go to the core team first. They are the people that should know first, right? They were there with you. And it's followed by your faculty because they're probably the most impacted. And then it might start to get to the larger community, but really think through who needs to see it first and honor that kind of respect that you need to give, because we want to make sure that happens, that they feel like it's not, wait, why did the parents find out and I didn't know anything about it? Like we don't want that to happen. We want to come to them first.
So then after we gathered the faculty feedback and we had a pretty good sense of what was happening, the facilitators came back and we put the final touches on the report, and then you're ready to move forward. So then after that, you really want to present this finalized report. And with your core team, when people were asking about trust, like it's really, again, that iteration process and the input and feedback process. But also when you have this decision making at the end, you really need to make sure you have that core team. And it's not that anything's going to change drastically, even if someone says, I blocked this proposal, which everybody did the work together. So we knew that wasn't going to happen. But even if they do, it's an opportunity for you to gauge like, okay, where are we as a team and what sort of support are we going to need to provide to make sure that this gets rolled out and is effective and it is in a positive way. So that was really important. So we did this decision-making gradients of agreement protocol based on the recommendations.
Yeah, and this is from Sam Kainer's work, who has this really great book on decision-making. It's one of my favorites. But yeah, I think it's called Facilitator's Guide to Decision-Making, really straightforward title. But what you do with this is, and what I like about this than just like majority voting is this allows people to say that they're okay with it, but maybe not be like the most excited ever. And I think that because, and this is the important thing, consensus is not unanimity. Right? Unanimity means we all agree 100%. And when you're at this process, it should never be about unanimity. Consensus means the will of the group. So what is this team of core people generally feeling? So what you can do is you can have people like go up and vote on the board on the 1, 2, 3. If in general, just on a side note, people are in that, 1, 2, 3, and 4 area, you're in a good place. As in, not everyone's woohoo, but they're okay. If you start to get like 5s and 6s, you might say, well, here's the other thing. It's also whoever's a 5. Like, let's say Gynelle was a 5. Like, I'm not ready yet. We can say, Gynelle, you marked a 5. Can you talk more about why you're maybe not quite there yet? We can then address it in the moment. Maybe it requires us to just say, well, if we do this, I really want to make sure this happens. Or can we word it this way? And you'll go, sure, and then that moves Gynelle to a 3. Or we might even say that, Gynelle, how might we move you to more of a 3 or a 2? And it allows people to be transparent about their thinking and not opt out. When I've done this, I've only had very rare moments where somebody's like in a 7 or an 8. And even then, like, we decided to move forward and that person did feel great, but they came around after a while. But in general, it usually works because it allows you to talk through those problems or those disagreements that you might have. Because honestly, it's not usually that they don't like the idea. It's there's something else that they want to make sure we address within the context of the problem. But I really like this protocol.
And one other thing I'll say, like, is also we've talked about your communication and your intent for their engagement. So like when I've used this, the intent of the engagement was to gauge, like sometimes, yes, it is decision making, right? The gradients of agreement, but it's also to gauge where people are. Yeah. So I've even been up front where I've said like, this is the decision. Like most recently, this wasn't part of this overarching review, but in another smaller section that's been happening of the implementation, there was a decision that some people weren't actually pleased with. So it wasn't a decision making. Right. It was we presented the decision and I added some indicators. And if I added like around the 6 area was, I can't move forward with this yet, but here's the help that I need, or here's the specific questions that I have. And so during the session where we were engaging, then I could start to support those people. And it was really cool what I had them do. This one was anonymous because I knew it was a contentious issue. So I had them put it on a sticky note and fold it. And then I tallied the data. And then after the day, we did it again. And the data actually moved. And it was a really cool visual for people to see that as we move forward together, we can actually be on board together.
Yeah, again, like that's a really good point, Gynelle, that it's not just decision-making, it's also just gauging where people are at. And I do like the question around support. If I remember when we presented the recommendations on math to some of the faculty, one of the questions we asked is, but it was kind of saying, this is where we're going, but what support do you need? And they were writing, I would really like planning days for this, or if we could get a trainer here, or I just need time. Like we were able to figure out what those things were to feed into plans later. So You've got it. You've got your report. You've got your recommendations on what to improve upon, and you're all done. No, you're not. Now it's about engagement. And actually, this is that closing of the loop, the cascading communications, making sure everyone's getting the same message and is updated on how this work will go. So some tools that we've used, just to be kind of clear, is when we communicated. One thing that when we think about parent input, I would think of it through this way, right? So part of parent engagement is input, and part of it is sharing out. So when we did the focus groups, input, what do you think? What are your opinions? What's important to you? And then part of the parent engagement is also just sharing out. What are we doing? What's going on? And as Gynelle mentioned, part of that is, your parent newsletters. One way we did it is, we have our, e-news at the end of the week. And if there was something on math, we put in there. But we also work with our superintendent in part of his letters to say, hey, I've been going into math classrooms and let me tell you what's going on. The other thing that we did was we created a math microsite. And again, with Gynelle, not everyone got into it. That's okay. It's still there. And it looks a little bit like this, where we took, things like, what did we do? What were our beliefs? What sort of data collection? What areas did we look into and investigate? We put up a PowerPoint slide of one of the engagement sessions. We shared the members of the team that were on it. We again shared our literature review and those statements that we mentioned earlier, our findings, and all the things. So it's all there. It's all there, and they can even click in and do that. But here's the thing I want to talk about, and that you'll see here, it says report summary, and then at the end it's like full report. So back to the slide deck, what I want to talk about is, when you think about this, you're going to have those parents that are really, really excited about this work, right? And they're going to want to dig deep. And then there's those parents who are like, just tell me the quick 5 seconds of it all, because I'm really busy. I don't have time for that. And then you're going to get that kind of in the middle place where it's like, I want a little bit more detail, but I don't have time to read a full report. So really, when you're thinking about it, think about, actually, let me jump ahead to this and come back. The layered approach to the sharing out of the work. For example, what's the summary? Use graphics and videos to do that, and just have a table. And that's it. So for example, when we were talking about areas of strength and areas of growth, which is in the report, we just shared the table. Now we had data over here, we had more descriptions, but that's in the full report. That's for much later. That's like what the board might read, for example. They might dig into that if they're interested. But for average parent that just wants to know the general sense of it all, you're going to do tables. Then you're going to have then there's those what you might call 1 or 2 pagers, and that's a little bit more if I just kind of want to read it on a couple pages, and that might include more tables or more action steps and timelines. So as an example, I'll jump to our math site. If you click here, here's the report summary, if it'll open for me here. And you'll see it's a few pages long, but it's not as long as our report. So it says, again, see, there's that, it says, full report, click here. It just says, what did we do? Who was on the team? What did we find? And here are the recommendations and the general timeline. That's it. So we're going to revise our courses. We're going to provide PD, and it's going to happen between August and May of this time. And here are some specific action steps. So you really want to think through the parent communication lens of kind of what kind of approach you want to take on this, and how you need to have multiple layers to honor the different ways that your community, not just parents, but even some other teachers, they may want to dig in and be like, oh, wow, tell me more about that data. And show me what happened when kids said this. Oh yeah, go on and read the kid data, go for it. And also just really, when you think about it, continue to share out where were the engagement opportunities, for example, where did you connect with people? We did this, show that you casted a wide net. It wasn't just parents, we talked with students, we talked with alumni, and start to share those things. And again, really being honest around the areas of strength and growth. I think when you do this, you do want to find the areas of strength, because that tells you what you need to keep doing. And then you go to those areas of growth and just be really honest about it. So the other thing that I will say about parent communication that's really, really, really important is to frame it around, you said, we did, or we will. So this idea of you said you were concerned around understanding how to choose math courses and how to get into middle school pathways and how that it was confusing and that, all that. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to revise our process in middle school to et cetera. Or you said you were concerned around consistency in the level of teaching in our math classrooms. We will provide clear guidance and training to teachers. So that kind of frame really has helped our communication in terms of sharing we hear you and we are doing something because of it. So I would advocate for that frame whenever possible or when appropriate in the work. The other frame that might help too is this idea of what does this mean for your student or family? And I think this was a really big learning for me is like, if I'm a parent, I just want to know what this means for my kid. Like, what does this mean on Monday when my child goes to school? So, and it could be family, it could be like for you or that. So for example, if we're going to look at our middle school pathways, so what does that mean for my kid? Well, it means that all students will have opportunities to access higher level math courses. Like that's and so as a parent, you go, oh, I see why this matters. Or, hey, what do you mean detracting high school teachers from courses? Like, I don't really care. What does that mean for my kid? Well, it means that your students are going to have teachers of range of backgrounds and experiences as they engage. And it's not going to be the same old teachers all the time. So that frame of here's what we're going to do, what does this mean for your student and family can also provide some ways of having people understand what this means in that very tangible way. Because to be honest, I am, when in writing this report, you get so far in the weeds of the data and the recs, and you just start thinking about all the action. It's really about that. What does this mean for kids? And coming back to that is important when we think through that. All right, let's talk about action planning. And so you're communicating, you're probably going to communicate part of your action plan, but initially you're just sharing what you're going to do, like in general. We are moving forward, and here are the first ones and the second one. So with that spirit, I'm actually going to share, Gynelle's going to talk about that a bit.
Yes, so this is the whole process was fun. Andrew and I are nerds, so we really enjoyed it, I think. But this is the part where really it starts to happen. So it's super, super exciting, also super overwhelming because it's like, oh, now I have to do something with these things. So we really had to decide based on all of our recommendations. We had to look at the capacity that we had, where we were with beliefs, like what really needed to change right away. And we took all of the recommendations and we framed them around recommendations for immediate implementation. So those were fairly short term, like within the next 6 months, within the next year. And then some other things that actually required further investigation. So we found different things. There'll be a slide in just a second, but like math materials in the elementary school. We knew from the recommendation that we wanted to start looking at a material to adopt, but we needed to actually investigate all of those materials first. So we framed them around those two categories, recommendations for immediate and then recommendations for further investigation.
Right, as in the immediate ones, you don't really need another decision involved. You know what you need to do. You need to provide training on it, great, go provide the training. You need to revise your units because you already know how to do that. Great, go do it. But then the other ones are, oh, we can't make a decision on this. Like as Gynelle said, we can't figure out what material to pick. We need more time. We know it's a problem, but we need more time. So as an example.
Yeah. So here you can see there were like, you could revise courses based on depth rather than breadth. So looking at your power standards even, which is something we do regularly. So for us, that was a pretty easy lift. Professional learning doesn't mean that you have to have a whole implementation plan in place, but you can start providing some of those scope and sequence of content for diverse backgrounds in Singapore, Asia history, or etc. And then looking at race and discrimination, like that was a need that needed to start happening straight away. Again, further recommendations, the math curriculum. We knew we wanted to explore tracking and pathways. We found that there were some inequities because of tracking and pathways. So we really need to investigate what's the best way to move forward. And you can see some of the others, experiential learning, English language learning program, looking at students with different intellectual needs. And those are the things that we spent, like, for example, in the elementary school, we spent the entire year doing some professional development alongside looking at material. So, and we're still going. So.
Yeah. And so these are all examples from different reviews, just to be clear: math, social studies, learning support, and English language learners. So, like, for example, out of the review for English language learners is like, we need to do PD on these certain sort of literacy work and, restructuring schedules. Okay, we got to do it. Great. But then it was like, well, do we need to expand our program? I wonder. That's not something we can make a decision on. Let's figure that out. So then it leads to another maybe action team to come together and say, okay, what's our process for figuring out, how we investigate that further, because it needs a little bit more attention than just being able to flip a switch. And so I just want to name that. That's probably a good way to think of it. And the other thing about it is that I appreciate is this also allows you to say, not yet, because you're going to come out of these reviews with lots of possible action steps. And this at least allows you to signal, we will not be getting to that right away. Now, I know that doesn't always make everyone happy, because, I'll be honest, sometimes our parent community, why can't you fix it now? We're like, well, we can't, because we want to actually get more feedback from you. And we want to figure out more, like, what the right thing to do is. So, but it does allow you to put things off or, prioritize. So in that spirit, I think I just teed Gynelle again.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, back to, there are lots of recommendations. Even within the near recommendations, you are going to have to prioritize depending upon how big your review is. So this was a really cool protocol that we used to help visually represent the ideas of the group. So essentially what we did was we took the each of the recommendations. This was for the near term at first, and each person was given 5 stickers. And that was for them to prioritize. So then they went around and they said, yes, this one is the most important. And they could use their 5 stickers to vote essentially on the ones that were most important for them. And then we had them do a flat chat. So if you're not familiar with the flat chat, essentially you just go around and you write on the posters and then people read it and add to it. So it's a way to connect thinking. And so we really asked, you could ask many different questions. And this one, we asked something like, what needs to be done to make this happen? So kind of like, what is the support? Like, if we're going to adopt materials, or what needs to happen? So we did on this one with the flat chat, we did both the near term and the future, so that we could get a sense of what really is the lift behind some of these things. What are some things that we really need to consider? But back to the near term ones, we were able then with the stickers to look across and say, wow, yes, this, everybody sees that this is the most important. And that's how we could use their feedback and input to really prioritize. So it wasn't just Andrew and I making the decisions, which really helped with the buy-in.
Yeah. So back to a question that just came up in the chat, this idea of who was involved in sorting them. We did bring it to our superintendent and deputy superintendent and said, these are all the things you need to do from your perspective. What do you think is most essential, or what do we need to do? And they gave great feedback on what are the quick wins, right? Immediate. Let's focus on the quick wins, and what are things that need to be further investigated. It was also given input from the team itself. They were the ones that crafted and said, we got to do more work here. We can't just make a decision. So when they crafted the recommendations, we kind of started to sort them in this way. It just kind of happened organically, but ways to do it are to use your core team or to go to senior leadership and say, hey, this is what's coming out of the review. What do you see as things that we can just immediately action? And what are things that from your perspective, we should not just immediately action and take some time with that? Anything you want to add to that, Gynelle?
Nope.
Awesome. So yeah, this helps you prioritize. It helps you figure out what you need to do first. And so the idea behind this is from all these recommendations, you're not going to be able to action all of them in the first year. You might only pick maybe we had, I think, like 10, Gynelle, or something like
Maybe,
that.
yeah. Maybe not even that many.
Yeah, I mean, some of them synergistically work together. So we were able to kind of, but if I really estimate what we were able to accomplish, I would say we really did 5 in the first year, 5 of them. And next year, we're probably going to continue a couple of them and add a couple more, and then we'll address another one the next year. So you don't have to hit them all at the same time. And this actually helps you figure out, oh, that's not super pressing. We can do that later. I'll be honest, an example of that was that detracting of teachers from high school math. That didn't emerge as a priority for anyone. We know it needs to happen, but everyone's saying we'll get to it. What's really important is we need professional development, or what's really important is we need to pick a resource. And we're like, okay, let's lean into that because that's where people want to go. So the ones that require further investigation, those ones that we mentioned, guess what? More decision-making, more rapid frameworks to create. As in, if one of your recommendations is to discover if you should expand your EAL program, who's recommending, who's decide, et cetera. If one of your long-term recommendations is to, like in this case, decide on a math ES resource, what's your rapid framework for that? So as a sample here, you'll see ES math specialist, that's Gynelle, right? And this is modified now since we put this together. I just want to be really transparent, but the idea is you want to be able to name how this decision will be played out. And it's going to be different than the one you just made for the whole report. Now we're starting to get nitty gritty because some of these recommendations affect the whole school and some of them just affect a division or a small group of people. So we're going to require a different thing. Like this one was all about elementary with some touches in senior admin. But you'll notice like we didn't consult middle school. We didn't figure, like there was like a little bit of touch, but not that much.
Yeah.
So think through that. What's your rapid framework for that? Gynelle?
And I was just going to say, the beginning of this really was just elementary, but what then we did realize was that maybe middle school needed a resource as well. And so we had to start expanding. So things that we learned and took from this then started expanding to other divisions. So do realize that it's flexible. What I was gonna say was one thing that you want to make sure that you do with the rapid framework is, and this is when Andrew said it was modified, it was because we made a misstep perhaps. The recommend area had more than 1 or 2 people in it, which then it became really complicated, even though we were trying to come to consensus and we had lots of professional development to bring everybody on the same page. In a framework with the rapid framework, you really want to have input from all of those different stakeholders and then 1 or 2 people to make the recommend.
Yeah, that's really important because if, for example, your curriculum director is your decide, then 1 or 2 people, maybe it's your curriculum coordinator and the deputy principal bring it to them, for example. Now, granted, input can be far and wide. You can list as many people as you want in input. You should, depending on what the decision is. But for this, we learned quickly that it needs to be 1 person that recommends. Because so for example, for social studies next year, I'm going to be recommending our new scope and sequence to our deputy superintendent and chief academic officer. But I'm getting input from parents, faculty, students. I'm looking far and wide, but I am the one bringing the recommendation and it lands on me. And I know it front, sideways, backwards, and can speak to it so that when it comes time to communicate it out, I'm the best person to do that. And you have built that on, but it's really important to have 1, maybe 2 people. Similarly, in the agree, 1 person. Really should be 1 person that does that. And again, with the decide, same idea. You're not going to bring it to a huge group of people to decide. You're going to bring it to a person. So some things to think about as you think through the decisions you will have to think through as they start to become more prevalent. And then, of course, now it's the time to start thinking about, who does what by when. and you start to build out calendars, and you think about who's involved, and you think about when it's going to happen and what sort of engagement it's going to be. What type of meeting? Is it a content leader meeting? Is it a PD meeting? Is it an office of learning meeting? Is it a senior educational leader meeting? Like, this is when it gets pretty nitty gritty, but whoever's leading this will need to figure out that calendar and action plan. Something to note about this is the action plan is created by whoever needs to recommend the thing. So what Gynelle did, which was amazing, is she created the action plan. She sat down and said, in order to create a recommendation on ES resource, we're going to have this, we're going to do this, and this is going to happen. Similarly, for me, I'm the recommend on the scope and sequence of social studies as we do that investigation. Well, I'm putting together a calendar now of who am I talking to here? When's the decision? When am I bringing people up to speed? When's the community engagement? So again, that's the person who needs to craft the action plan for the work, is whoever's making that recommend. Alice is asking how many years in your math review cycle if there are longer term. Yeah, great point. We're thinking 5 to 6 years is when you revisit a group. So I would err on the side of 6, just because you're going to have so many of these that they need time to implement. And I don't know if anybody's heard of the literature on de-implementation, but that literature is interesting and only kind of coming to fruition. But people need time to implement and then de-implement, as in you did it, now let's take the energy off the pedal and focus on different things. And so you have to talk people both, you have to talk, because you know how our teachers are sometimes, they just get so invested in work that sometimes it's like, actually our energy should be over here. Why are you putting all your energy here? We've done that, it's good. An example of that is sometimes we see teachers just, let's look at the assessment again and again and change it over. I'm like, it's good, leave it alone. We'll come back to it in a few years. Like, just focus on teaching. And so sometimes you have to message that and de-implement. So therefore you need, 6 years of a time. But I would say it takes about 3 years for it, like review year, and at least 2 to 3 more years of like making sure all the actions occur. And that leaves a couple more years to just not touch anything and just reinforce to make it work.
Yeah, and it depends on the heavy lift, right? So like, for example, we spent 1 whole year looking at resources. Now we're next year, so that was the 2nd year of the review. Now next year, the 3rd year, we're really digging into the new resource and the professional learning. So a lot of the learning is now just taking place in the 3rd year. The other thing I would say about time, which was something that came up, is you always have to make decisions about how long you're going to do something. And there's never a good time. So let me give you an example. We wanted to pilot some materials, but we are also moving into a new building. And so, yes, you might want to say, oh, we're going to take 5 years to explore this and sort it out. That's great, but you also need some action. So really being able to balance the pros and cons about how fast can we do this and really do it well versus how long are we going to drag this out?
That's really important because, I know we keep using this example, but I think it's just because it's been top of mind for Gynelle and I as the ES curriculum resource. We, on the one hand, we were given a clear and urgent mandate to get this implemented as quickly as possible. It was a need we needed. And so our calendar was a year to get it done. Reflecting upon that, it was very fast. And teachers were very loud and clear about, we felt like we didn't get the deep dive and the time that we needed. So there's never a right or perfect answer on this, but there's always a tension between making your promises come true in a way that is showing you're doing it, and at the same time moving at an appropriate speed that doesn't overrush the process. I don't think we're saying we know exactly the answer, but we're aware of it. And I don't know, Gynelle, if you want to kind of add to that idea of the urgency.
Yeah, I mean, just be, like Andrew said, just be aware of it and really gauge, like, okay, are we doing this well enough? And we did do our process well enough. Like we feel confident this is the best process. I'm talking about the curricular resource. It's the best process we've ever actually engaged in with the depth. And so we were okay to move forward, but yeah, that's all I'll say about it.
Similarly, like when I think about the social studies scope and sequence solidification, that was a recommendation, we can action that quickly. And we actually think we can get that figured out in 6 months, like with a decision by winter of next year, where we say, here it is now, and then we can talk about what the implementation is. Then like how long will it take to make it a reality? But we have so much already built. It's just a matter of going in, making tweaks and working with a small team. So we feel like 6 months will be enough time. Other things might take longer. So it really just depends, but working through it. The other thing that I would say that we've learned is, and this is back to the whole process, we recommend starting sooner and just charting your meetings and not having to schedule them as you go. Just name that parent focus groups will happen on this week in October and just make it happen, because then you can end early and then you get a few months to figure out some early thinking, planning, and maybe even getting started. For example, had we known what we know now and we were done quicker, Gynelle might have been able to get a team together in March or April and start the process, right? And then that would give her more time. But we didn't do that well. So the sooner you can, in the process, just nail down dates and just keep yourself on it, the more time you can create for yourself. So a couple more slides. We're actually going pretty quick today. Hopefully that's all right with people. A couple more tools that we want to mention, then we'll get to a Q&A, and we appreciate people asking questions along the way. Another thing to consider as you plan professional development and training, specifically, this is about professional development training, because I'll be honest, every single review will have professional development and training. That's not going to happen. It will happen. And so with that, I like using Killian's logic model from Assessing Impact. That book is all about how do you assess whether or not training and PD that you're doing with teachers actually results in student learning and teacher behavior changes. So here you articulate, like, for example, the inputs, like what resources are you putting into this machine? Time, money, things like that. What sort of activities will happen? The services provided, like we'll do observations, we'll have team meetings. What are those outputs, tangible outputs? Like there'll be agendas, surveys, observations, coaching goals. And then you start to talk about initial and intermediate outcomes. So, and initial outcomes are what are changes in knowledge and skills and attitudes. So beliefs, able to do things. And so, for example, an initial outcome from, I'm just kind of playing this out for the training we're doing. We really want teachers to understand the key components of problem-based learning lessons and curriculum. They need to know that. What we're hoping is an intermediate outcome is that hopefully they'll know how to use and adapt it in their instructional practices. They may not know that right away. That's a behavior or an aspirational change that we're hoping for. And then ultimately it's like, well, what does it mean for student learning? And like, for example, we like SMART goals, right? Percentage of students will score proficiency or above on MAP or whatever that is. So this is another way to think through what, if you do this training and you do this PD, what is your intended goal for students and teachers, and what are the resources you're going to have to put in? This actually also talks about, like, the reason this is important in the book, Killian talks about this idea of like the black box of PD. And what she means is like you have PD and then it magically leads to results. Like this magical thing happens. She says you need to sit down and articulate what's inside that black box. Like, what is the secret that will lead to the result? Because we assume, okay, training from Jay McTighe equals more student learning. How do you know that? What are you looking for teachers? What are you looking for students? What sort of activities are going to happen, not just from that training, but ongoing, for example? So this is one tool that you might consider in using. In addition to logic models and thinking through what you're intending, again, thank you, dissertation. I was sharing this morning actually in my team meeting on how we might craft more better surveys for our in-services. And one of my team members says, so you mean $80,000 got you this? And I said, you bet it did. But I will say Kirkpatrick and Kirkpatrick are very good around training evaluation and this idea of crafting excellent survey questions that really get you what you're looking for. And I want to talk through that a bit now and think about any sort of training you do, whether it's from a consultant or internal. You really should think about how you're going to use some longitudinal survey results for teachers. So this is really trying to measure how that training did. So when you have a training, you're probably going to craft a survey questions that are about reaction and learning, as in, how did people feel about it, right? They felt it was relevant and useful, good use of time. They enjoyed the facilitator. There was popcorn or whatever it is, right? They're happy about the thing itself. They feel, and that will give you feedback on maybe facilitation needs to be changed, or maybe we need to change the timing, right? You also want to see what learning occurred. And so that's when you might have like Likert scales that say, I learned XYZ, or I'm able to do this, or I understand this, or a drop-down menu or choices. These are the things I learned today. For example, it might be, I learned how to redress, how to reflect on my own cultural biases, or I understand how to implement a problem-based curriculum. So it's all about learning. And that happens right after the training, because you're asking, what did people learn and how did they feel about it? Then 90 days is usually what they say, 90 days out. So that's a few months. You then follow up with a similar survey, but it's about results and impact and some level of learning. So you're not asking them about how they felt about the training, because that was months ago. You're also not asking too much about what they were learned, but you're asking, what do you remember about what you learned? So to see if it's kind of still there. But then you want to ask for behavioral questions, as in, I can do these things now, or my confidence in doing these things is improved, or I feel this. So this is about like self-efficacy, motivation, and those types of things. And then you want to ask questions around results. So for example, you might say, one way I've seen it done is you have a checklist and it says, in my classroom, I am seeing the following results. Students are talking more about math. Students are, students are able to explain their learning. Students are asking more questions. So you're actually measuring for results in the classroom, not just how we felt about it, not just did the training go well and I learned. So this is a model that we're trying to use as we move forward when we think about some of the trainings, asking immediately how to go, but then checking in later and saying, yeah, remember that thing that we did and you know that you were supposed to implement that thing? Are we seeing it? Are you, not only are you changed as the teacher, but are you seeing results in your classroom? And that actually starts to make you think through, wow, what happens if you don't see the results? What's missing there? So, Gynelle, you want to add anything to that? Because this is part of your dissertation as well.
Yes. The impact stage, did the training change the behavior? Another way besides a survey or an interview is to use look for documents. Yes, and so it's actually, you can use observations during this level 3 to really see, were they able to take that learning and apply it in the classroom? Yeah. So we look forward to doing that as we move forward.
Yeah, and what's, yes, go ahead. Is that Jacqueline? Go ahead again. Hi again.
Hi. So a question I have about this is, I think we have this assumption that teachers have the mindsets and skills of reflection and transfer that we want our students to have, and therefore like they could answer those questions meaningfully, but that's not always the case. So as you're implementing and also gathering data about the implementation, how do you account for skills needed like reflection and transfer? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's definitely, even in the research, it talks about self-assessment versus direct assessment and how oftentimes they don't match. So you're absolutely right. You might think that you know something or that you've learned it, and actually you don't. I think a lot of those things are built into our PLC times. So just like, you would do with conversations with children in your PLCs, you reflect on like, okay, so what is the evidence about this? Like we actually have reflection journals in the elementary school. And so every PD or anything that we do during our PLC time, we actually have them reflect on the learning from before. And then we have them write something down and share with the partner or then share out so that people can begin to see like, what does this actually sound like? So
Yeah, I'll add to that. Yeah, again, that's why Gynelle also mentioned like going into classrooms and seeing if things are actually occurring, like perception versus reality. So you got to go do the look fors. And then of course your student learning results, whatever those student like actual, if it's MAP assessments or external exams like AP exams or ID or whatever it is, like you want to see that. And then the other thing is around the PLCs is if you're a leader, attending those PLC meetings and listening for that, listening, as you were saying, we're listening for, are we seeing that they learn? I'm listening for learning immediately. And then I can listen for reflection of, yeah, I was doing this practice, but it didn't work. And now I'm doing that. Or you sit down and maybe some of you have individual teacher conferences, like your performance eval. That's also where you can start to assess for the actual impact on teacher behavior. And you can say, for example, if a goal is around high quality teaching in math for the year, you can make that a really great goal and then keep checking in on, is that change in behavior occurring? Perfect segue, because that's what we have for you today. What other questions do people have around anything that either what we shared today or over the whole time we had together? Either raise hands or you can type it. Another one.
Full of questions.
Go for it.
So I'm wondering, when you were talking about sharing with the community, and you talked about like feedback and many kind of cycles, do you share with the wider community before making an action plan or after or both, or it depends?
I'm trying to remember because I think we've done it both ways. I think that we've done it where for math, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gynelle, we shared the recommendations, but we didn't share the action plan, right? We just said, here's what we're going to do. And we asked them what was important to them, which informed the action plan, like what happened. For social studies, we're being a little different this time, where we're sharing the recommendations and some of the immediate steps. And I think the reason we're doing that is there are some political aspects of it that we want to name, that we're taking very specific steps. Versus when we said, for example, we're going to adopt a math curriculum in ES, not really politically fraught, like, yeah, go for it. Why wouldn't you? But when one of the recommendations out of social studies is around teaching hard history, which has to do with like, how does a teacher effectively teach something like slavery? Because we're not doing that well. That one could raise some eyebrows. So we want to signal what we're doing and what we're not doing. And I think that's why in this case, we're going to signal some action steps, because we want to tell parents, no, we're not doing critical race theory. That's not what this is about. We want to tell them exactly what we're doing so there's no confusion. And I think that's a really good thing to think about. Is your recommendation politically fraught? In that case, you might want to give them more of a picture of what that looks like. If it's not, and they just want to know you're going to action it quickly, you're fine with just recs.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the political, like, even though the math material in the elementary school isn't politically fraught, what we chose is. And so instead of waiting for our recommendation, we actually brought the parents in to look at the material. So we started with a bunch, and then we went narrowed it down, the math team in the elementary school, and then we took those 4 resources to the parents and taught them like what we were looking for, and by like teaching them a lesson and naming that, and then they actually got to give input on the materials that we were choosing, because we knew, especially because we're in Singapore and Singapore math is such a big deal, and we weren't choosing Singapore math. And so we really needed to address that. So again, based on what is the political ramifications of it, that's sort of how we decided. Any other questions?
I have more questions, but I will wait.
One thing I would also say, Andrew and I started this process, and so we learned a ton. And in retrospect, some things like now we have a template that shows, like, it's the same for every review. So simultaneously running to the math review was a learning support review, and then the templates looked a lot different and the communication structures looked a lot different, and that didn't go so well. Like, teachers don't like it, parents, you need to have something common. So if you're going to start this, sit down and try to figure out, like, what are those important parts that you want in your report so that you have, and how are you going to communicate so that you have some consistency in whatever you do.
Yeah, and the good news is once you have that down, you also start to have templates for slide decks, templates for focus groups, templates for this, like, and then all you do is just change the content. Like this year for social studies, so much easier than last year. I mean, I was able to be, oh yeah, I'll just pull that old slide deck from there, or hey, here's the report template. So let's see.
Michelle, you asked a great question there. A curriculum review or reform that's driven by a switch of focus and philosophy. Actually, our math really is. So, and so that's why the lift is so heavy, is because we have some things that we need. For one, we don't even have a philosophy in math across the school, or didn't, and now we do. But it's huge because we had to create, one of the recommendations was to create a philosophy, and now we need to bring everybody on board with that and give them that learning and experience. So not that they become acculturated per se, but really that they understand and believe it. I'm not sure if that was the right answer to that question, if that was what you were asking.
The other thing that might be hinting on is, have you ever had to do a review because you got to make a change?
That could have been there, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that's why the math review was first.
Yep, exactly.
That actually came from, so our superintendent did a full listening tour with teachers and parents and students. It was a really, like, the first year, that's all he did, which was awesome. And this is why we talked about math, because math came up and we're like, he's like, I'm hearing a lot of buzz here, a lot of concerns. This speaks to me and says, something's not right here. Something's not great. Let's do that one first, right? And so that also drove the order of the reviews. And that's why we also said, and I'm hearing things on social studies, that's the next one. So it's driven by community input and urgency, and sometimes a desire to make a change. You may not know what those changes are, but something's not right here and we got to get better at it. And so let's find out what's going not well to make those changes. Anything else?
Andrew, did we share the landing page?
Oh,
I don't know.
I will try. No, but it might. Here's the problem. It's actually password protected. Haha.
No, I mean our landing page. So one thing that's also really important is not that landing page, but
okay, yeah. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
I don't know if you can find it. I can
find it real quick.
Shoot you the link. It's actually on slide 51.
It is.
We find some way to collate. I did mention that we put together a website that did not work, but we made a landing page for everything for the team so that everything was there. So it wasn't just in Google folders, but Andrew will pull it up in just a moment. So this can answer one of the questions someone had about how many times did you meet, but we really had every single thing that any of us were using was linked to this document so that it was hopefully easy to find.
Yeah. So here you should see norms and working agreements, and then all of our meetings, our slide decks. We had a Padlet that we used here. So you can see, we had a lot of meetings. There was a lot of, and some of these were faculty meetings. Some of these, like just the faculty, some of them were core team meetings. And then we put in all our tools, reference documents, literature review summaries, the blueprints, data collection tools, engagement plans. So it's an archive of the work, so you can go to it. And that was shared with the core team. So anybody in the core team could go back and say, hey, what did that data say? Or what did we do last time? Or, what was the reflection activity that we did? So you can connect with people on that level and keep it consistent. That was helpful, I think, for us.
I've got a couple of questions related to kind of what you guys were just talking about, like, is there a problem or a shift? What if the powers that be don't see that there needs to be a shift, right? Not because they think what's there is good necessarily, but just that it's fine, or maybe it is good. Yeah, how do you approach, whether it's within who needs to be in the rapid framework or not? Yeah, how do you get that initial, yes, we want to look into this?
I think one way to do it is to introduce it more from a holistic model and say, we should be reviewing our curriculum. It's just what good continuous improvement. And you can use third points for that. Maybe in your leadership team, like, hey, let's talk about continuous improvement today, and then talk through, I'd like to, I think we should be doing curriculum reviews, and then we can talk through, I'd like to propose this one for our first one. But if you could center it around, why aren't we reflecting as an organization, and then steer towards maybe the one that you feel is important. The other way to maybe do that is to say, maybe you ask a community survey and you say, hey, we're thinking about reviewing our curriculums. Which ones are important to you? What would you like to tell us about that? Look through that data, and then you can go, wow, everyone really wants to look at, our ELA program, and they're concerned about it. Like, let's do it first. I find that, I talked last time about the importance of parents and the importance of stakeholders and community. And while challenging sometimes, are some of your best and honest feedback people, and they will tell you how they feel. And ultimately, they're the people that, and our kids, they're the number one people that we're serving. And I think one of the reflections that we talk about, and I think, Gynelle, you mentioned this at one point, but this idea of this is where the recommendations come into. This is not what's best for teachers. It's what's best for students. So if students aren't feeling good, or parents aren't feeling good about the experience of the students, and you're fine, teachers, that's not an excuse. And if framing it from that lens can lead to some pretty honest, changes that need to happen. Gynelle, you want to add anything?
The only, I would probably say sometimes literature speaks to people. So bringing forth an article on some, research about whatever it is. But I do feel like with the math, like Andrew said earlier, like I've been trying to do things, but you're right, it wasn't the biggest priority at the time. And so we had little momentum. It wasn't until the parents and the students spoke, literally or figuratively, that that's when it started, the momentum started. And so you really want to be able to figure out, get some of that data to be able to create the need, not necessarily just from you, but from the community.
Yeah. Any other questions? We're a little past 7. On a side note, I'm just going to type in my email here, and Gynelle, you can do the same. And a question, feel free, if you have follow questions as you sit down, reflect, or relax, and you want to ask us something in the middle of your process, feel free to reach out to us. Happy to help. The recordings will be sent out to you all, as well as the PDF of this slide deck, so you can refer to it later. I just want to name that, yes, those things will happen. And so you can refer to them, and again, ask a question. If you're like, oh, what was that thing about in there? Or how did you do that process? We're happy to respond and help you out with what you're thinking about doing. So
Absolutely.
with that, we really appreciate you coming on a Thursday night. And for those of you who have stayed with us for the 3 weeks, thank you. Good luck. We hope it goes well. And let us know. Let us know what you learned. We'd love to hear. So take care, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just
just want to say thank you. I'm stepping into the curriculum coordinator role next year, and you guys have been super inspiring. I've read much drier versions of how this can go, and it's really been, I'm excited. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It was exciting. It was actually really fun.
It was, you know, and
So
it-
as weird as that sounds.
No, that's what I want it to be, right? It should be exciting to study our practice and think about how we can do it better and to read the research. And
Yeah.
I just love that you brought in, you know, learning walks and conversations with kids. I think that you made it a really fantastic process. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. I mean,
Okay,
yes,
yeah,
I mean,
thanks.
it's a process. It is. But I think it's really, when I think it's very holistic. I mean, that was my reflection, is like when I similar to you, I was looking at resources to do this work, and there's not a lot out there, or it's very dry. It's very, you know, look at the curriculum and here's the criteria and assess it. And it's like, well, what about parents? Like, you know, what about kids? Like, it's very technical, and it doesn't have that kind of sense of vulnerability and heart and listening and engaging with people. So that's what we wanted to be. We wanted to be better than what just, you know, because in the past, like Gynelle was saying, it was just, okay, evaluate, cool, we're done. And
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
And thank
No, I
goodness
really
for
love that.
really
Thank you.
what's that?
Just thank you. Thank
Oh.
you.
No
Bet.
problem. Let us know if you need anything. We are
Great.
happy to help. So just, you can always
Thank you.
email us.
Yeah, I was literacy coach here, Type A American School. And so stepping in, I have like my people who are my literacy coach people. And I'm like, who are going to be my curriculum coordinator people? So I may be reaching out to you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Good. What school are you at again, Amanda?
Type A American School.
Awesome.
Okay. Are you the one that was talking to Ying?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good.
Hey.
Okay. She
Yeah.
was telling me about you. So
Yes. So I've done a lot of work for literacy for 7 years, and now I'm stepping into this role, and we've had a vacuum. We haven't done a curriculum review cycle
Same
in
thing,
over
we didn't do
11
it.
years.
Yeah, same thing. Well, what was it? 6 years, 7 years? Like we did maybe 8. I don't even know. Like it was forever. So good luck. You got this.
Yeah.
you can do it. You
Well,
can do
and-
it.
And I'm starting my doctorate this summer. So
Ooh, you are. Where at?
Hey.
Where is your doctorate through?
I'm going to New Mexico